Alright, my name's Travis, and this is my Ignite Talk. So we're going to be looking at 4 different formative assessment technology tools, a couple of conditions that must be present for you to use them effectively, and then some implications that come along with those conditions. So technology 1 is Padlet. Basically, it's an interactive dashboard that allows students to interact with themselves and with you during assignments or instruction. And it can be used to gauge where they're at, if they're on task, if they're focused, and where they might need help. Socrative is an online discussion board which allows you to post a question on the overhead and then have your students respond to that question in real time with the responses showing up on the board. And it can be used to facilitate discussion and to get an idea of where their gaps in knowledge might be. Kahoot is a competitive quiz game where students compete with one another in real time to get the best score on quiz questions. And it can be used to prepare them for a quiz or just to see where some factual gaps in knowledge are. And finally, QuickKey is a multiple choice quiz grading software that allows you to quickly grade and then quickly use that data and tabulate it. And this can be helpful just to figure out where your students are at, especially if it's a pre-test that you gave them. So formative assessment is those 4 technologies are all methods of formative assessment. And each one uses a slightly different way to get at the same thing. But for formative assessment, there are a couple things that have to be present for it to be effective. If these 3 conditions are not met, it will mean nothing to you, it will mean nothing to your students. If even one is missing, it's going to fall flat and it won't be worth your time. So, condition number 1 is you have to know yourself. If you don't know your teaching style, your practice, how you like to teach and assess, this isn't going to work. You have to know where you're going with the unit and where you want the class to end up at the end of the day. This was conventional wisdom even before Socrates said it, but it still applies to modern teaching techniques and formative assessment. If you don't know what you're comfortable with in terms of assessing and grading, it's not going to work. Condition number 2 is you have to know your students. If you don't know how they learn best, what their personalities are, and what they'll tolerate in terms of ungraded assignments, then formative assessment is not going to work. You have to know where your students are at, i.e. in relation to the larger unit, and you also need to make sure that they know where they need to get to. Because if they don't know where they need to get to, they're not going to understand why the assessment's being taken place at all. And condition number 3, you have to know the numbers. You can know your students as best as you possibly can, and you can know exactly what you're comfortable with in terms of your teaching practice and how you assess, but if you don't know what the data is and what it says, you won't be able to use it. Even if you know what the numbers are, but you don't know what the data means, you can't tabulate the data, it's going to be completely useless to you and your students. You have to be able to look at the data in a timely manner and tabulate it. Because effective assessment has enough time to act on. You have to have time to be able to implement what you learned from the formative assessment. It has to be evaluated, and that evaluation has to come with feedback. Because if it doesn't, then it's not worth any of our times. Ineffective feedback, or ineffective assessment, on the other hand, does not meet one of the conditions above. It's graded, it leaves no feedback, and it doesn't allow time for mastery. The feedback is important on any formative assessment. And mastery is the point of school. If we are learning or trying to teach for a grade, something's wrong. There are a couple important implications that come along with this idea of mastery, but basically it should be what we're doing. It takes time because you don't expect anybody to get anything right the first time. In fact, it can take up to 10,000 hours to become an expert on something. And formative assessment must allow for this required practice. Implication number 2 with mastery is that formative assessment can't always be for a grade. Sometimes it has to be for a grade because you need to put grades in, but most of the time you shouldn't be graded. You don't have people holding up scorecards for you the first time you try to ride a bike. It's ridiculous. And in conclusion, there are plenty of formative assessment tools out there, but in order for them to be used effectively, you have to know thyself, know thy students, and know thy numbers. Learning is for mastery, and formative assessment has to allow for that practice. And finally, best quote in the book, assessment for learning is a gift we give our students. It is a mirror we hold up to show them how far they have come, and it is a promise that we will use this assessment not to punish or reward, but to guide them along the path of their learning journey. And that should be the point for everything. Thanks for listening.